Breaking just this morning, authorities in Pennsylvania opened an investigation into a decades-old case where sexual abuse claims were made against a Catholic priest. The McKean County District Attorney's Office confirms to NBC News the accused has not responded to requests for comment. This after Pennsylvania grand jury report released earlier this month identified hundreds of abusive priests and more than 1,000 child victims across the state. This is all happening amid calls for Pope Francis to resign over a claim that he knew about the alleged abuse by a former American cardinal and allowed him to serve without punishment. Joining me now is Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro. He is leading the investigation into the Catholic clergy sexual abuse case in that state. Josh, great to see you. Thank you for being here in person. Thanks for undertaking this. Your report covers allegations that go back 70 years. In some cases, there's a statute of limitations that doesn't allow those to be prosecuted.
The grand jury identified 301 predator priests. They also identified a sophisticated, systematic cover-up by senior church leaders designed to keep these predator priests out of the reach of the law. Of those 301 predator priests, because of our weak laws in Pennsylvania, I was only able to charge 2 of those predator priests. And in fact, one of the reforms that the grand jury called for as part of this part of their recommendations that were contained in this report is to do away with the statute of limitations for criminal charges when it comes to child sexual abuse. Over almost 40 states have done that. There should be no statute of limitations.
Right. What's the hesitation on changing that? That seems to be something that should be easy to get done.
Allie, the church has powerful lobbyists who have lobbied Harrisburg and people in the Capitol for some time. I believe that after reading this report, this nearly 1,000-page report that contained, clear information on at least 301 predator priests, what the grand jury called thousands of victims, this systematic cover-up involving bishops and at least one cardinal, I can't imagine any lawmaker voting against the reforms now that the grand jury has called for.
Let's just read through some of the statistics that came out of this report. There are approximately 1.2 billion Catholics living across the world. There are 414,000 Roman Catholic priests worldwide. In Pennsylvania alone, there are 2,509 priests in the diocese. You talked about 301 priests included in the grand jury report. So that's 12% of the state's priests. There are 1 or 2 counties that were not involved in this report, so these numbers could be a little bit higher. And in terms of property, to a point that you just made about the power of the church, the Catholic Church owns 300,000 square miles of land. California, just for reference, is 155,000 square miles of land. So they are a large property owner. They have a lot of wealth. The Vatican Bank has about $8 billion in assets. Accountability is a problem here.
Accountability is, and the story you're telling here is one of powerful institutions putting their reputation before the interests of those that they're charged to be concerned for, in this case, children. I don't know that storyline is much different when you're considering big universities or USA Gymnastics or corporations or big, governmental entities. But here in Pennsylvania, I am not going to tolerate an institution putting their interests above the needs of children. That's why we not only disclosed through this grand jury process the horrific abuse, but we showed really for the first time this systematic cover-up that stretched all the way to the Vatican, that was designed very purposefully to make sure these predator priests were out of reach of the law.
Right, and things were happening. They were moved to different places. Then the church ended up dealing with something called a code of conduct violations. There's a story out of Chicago now that a popular Chicago priest has been removed from his position after an allegation of a code of conduct violation involving a minor. Are these codes of conduct sufficient?
One of the things the grand jury pointed out in their report is that the church would use euphemisms, right? So they wouldn't call it child rape. They'd call it horseplay. They used different terms to basically shield what was actually going on there. We as prosecutors deal with facts and evidence and apply the law. And the facts and the evidence clearly show there was child abuse and assault and rape and a systematic cover-up. That's what went on here. And the Catholic Church, to call it by any other name, is just simply not understanding both the magnitude of what they did and the reality of what occurred.
Although there seems to be an implication that in some cases they do understand it. You tweeted yesterday, remember, secret archive is not my term. It's how church officials themselves referred to the troves of documents sitting in filing cabinets just feet from bishops' desks. Power and abuse begets lies and deceits. Are you worried about evidence being destroyed as more and more attention is brought to this issue?
What we learned in Pennsylvania through our grand jury process is that there were records kept in what was called by the church secret archives that the bishops had the keys to that documented this abuse. And Allie, what would occur very regularly is the bishop or the church leader would lie to parishioners, lie to the public, lie to law enforcement about the horrific abuse, but then document it in the secret archives. And in many cases, share those secret archives with the Vatican. It's all in the report for you to be able to read. So in many ways, I mean, what is so crazy about this is that the lies and the deceit and the cover-up were existing here in Pennsylvania and presumably in other states, though I certainly couldn't prove that.
We're focused on Pennsylvania, but nobody thinks that this, I mean, we've got examples from other countries where they've done this kind of research and statistics that are similar show up.
Right. I mean, look, we're very unique in Pennsylvania, as you know. Unfortunately, sadly, I don't think we're unique on this. But just to complete the thought, they would have all of these lies, all of this cover-up happening in Pennsylvania, yet then they would document exactly what was happening to the Vatican.
What do you think about Pope Francis here? This is a guy who a lot of people put a lot of hopes in to change things in the church. And now we don't know whether he's linked to it or whether he knew about it. What should he do, in your opinion?
I don't know that it's my place to say that. I'm the prosecutor. It's my job to present the facts and the evidence. But I've heard from Catholics in Pennsylvania. I've heard from Pennsylvanians who, and frankly, as a person of deep faith myself, Allie, can't fathom the way men of God would weaponize their faith and use it as a tool of abuse against children. I don't think any of us should tolerate that in law enforcement, in the church pews, in Pennsylvania, or anywhere in this country.
Attorney General Josh Shapiro, thank you for joining me. It's good to see you in person. You and I have lots of opportunities to talk about many of the things that you're doing out there, so it's great to have you here. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.